Emotional content is filmed on Whadjuk Noongar land. This podcast acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of country. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Come for the stories, stay for the connection. I'm your host, Amy Jane Brand, and this is your weekly dose of emotional content. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Emotional Content. I am not feeling the best right now, as you can probably tell by my voice. I sound super husky. So yeah, I'm not feeling very well, but the show must go on. I never want to leave you guys without an episode each week. So we are in the studio and we are filming regardless. Today's episode is something that has been a part of me my whole life, and it's been a journey. It is my diagnosis with ADHD, and it's been an episode that a lot of you requested when I asked to talk about certain subjects. A lot of you wanted me to talk about my journey with ADHD. It's a really personal journey, and it went from struggling to clarity. I don't feel as much shame around it as I used to. This episode is definitely good for anyone that has, ADHD yourself, or you're just going through your own journey with it, getting diagnosed late like myself, or you have a loved one who struggles with ADHD or is just getting their first diagnosis or even realization that this could be what they're dealing with. So I hope this episode could help any of you. I definitely had to take my medication for this episode this morning because I'm feeling super scrambled, especially with being sick. It really elevates the symptoms. So on that note, let's get straight into the episode. So I'm going to start from childhood into adulthood so you can get a real scope of what my journey was like with ADHD. So in year 3, I had my teacher go to my parents and tell them that he thought the best plan of action for me, at the end of year kind of wrap-ups was to hold me back a year so I wouldn't have continued learning on the same year as my peers, which I was super upset about. My parents mentioned it to me and I was like, absolutely not. I remembered chucking a full tantrum about it, and rightly so, because that's I don't know, I already felt quite different to other students, and then to be singled out that way, it just kind of gives everyone a reason to pick on you. And then you just, I don't know, I would have felt like I was considered really dumb by the other students if that happened. And then you're the older one in the class again. So it was something that I was not happy with. And my parents also disagreed on the teacher's advice. We did not hold me back a year. And I'm really happy they didn't, because the teacher's reasoning was basically, he was picking up on the fact that when I was reading information off the board, I would look up at it and check over what I was reading multiple times. That is the ADHD. It's a symptom that I struggled with, and it was because I was concerned that I was getting it wrong. I still to this day, mostly with numbers, have a bit of an issue with them being switched around or different order, which is a form of dyslexia. So when I was younger, to avoid that from happening and to make sure that I was getting the information correct, I would read over things multiple times and then I would write it down. And I guess it made me a little bit slower, physically, when I was copying things down on pen and paper or pencil. I didn't have my pen license then. So basically that's where he saw the issue. I was quite hyperactive in class as well. Not overly, but I definitely wasn't able to focus as well as I guess other kids. So that was showing up too. But when it came to that year, it was not seen for what it was. I obviously had an issue, but it wasn't a full-blown learning disability the way that he was kind of insinuating. So there wasn't enough knowledge about it at the time, and it kind of got overlooked. But I think that year 3 was the first time that somebody picked up on something going on with me. Apparently, now since getting diagnosed, that can be coexisting with ADHD. It's almost like a symptom of it, because my brain is going faster than, what I'm taking the information in. It's kind of it doesn't feel like dyslexia, but when I'm really heightened and my symptoms are feeling really just jumbled for the day, it does show up more. So that's the first thing that happened when I was super young. Obviously, back then, there was very little understanding of ADHD. So throughout my primary school years, it very much all just got completely overlooked, and by my parents as well. Like, they had no idea about it. I did have other signs that showed up when I was younger. Focusing and things like that have always been a bit of an issue for me, especially if there's like loud noises or specific noises going on, like tapping or something, and I'll zone in on that. There's just things that can distract me quite easily, and that happened when I was a kid. I had very low self-esteem quite young. People with ADHD have a lot of shame associated with having the ADHD, and you tend to have a lower self-esteem because of feeling different or being told off quite frequently, or things always being highlighted that you're not good at. For me, it was the bullying. I was often in trouble for talking by teachers, and that happened that happened from when I was a kid all the way up until high school, like, just chatting and, again, being the class clown, essentially. I also struggled with anxiety attacks, and I would say that this is because of the internalized anxiety and the thoughts and the racing, ruminating thoughts created anxiety attacks for me, because anxiety and depression can coexist heavily with ADHD. And when I was younger, which I have said in a previous episode, my doctor, the GP that we were going to at the time, who was shit anyway, but he thought that I potentially had asthma, and I didn't. I did every test for it, but I would often, be with my mum and like holding my chest saying I can't breathe. And I was having essentially anxiety attacks, panic attacks, and that would happen anytime I was like triggered over things. So that was showing up for me at a very young age in primary school. And it was completely overlooked. Like, mum would help me with breathing exercises and stuff, but it just was getting overlooked. Like, mental health especially was not something that people took very seriously back then. Being able to be diagnosed much younger as a female would have been a godsend. It's quite sad to think that I was going through that and no one was really diagnosing it properly. The challenges that I faced in high school and my teen years were struggles with organisation, focus, and rejection sensitivity. Rejection sensitivity was quite strong when I was going through like puberty in my teen years, and I think a lot of people with ADHD would be able to resonate with that. You're going through all the hormone changes and you're just trying to figure yourself out at that age, and everything just feels really intense. And rejection sensitivity is when you're picking up on any sort of criticism and you immediately start reverting back to feeling like you're a failure or you're not good enough. It's really strong within ADD and ADHDers. It's hard to juggle when you're a teenager because your emotions and feelings already feel so intense, and then adding on top that kind of sensitivity when people are pretty mean in those years. So yeah, it does make everything in your life just feel very heightened at all times, especially if you don't know how to regulate your emotions, which you absolutely usually don't at that age. Most adults with ADHD are walking around still learning how to regulate their nervous system. So you don't know how to do it when you're a teenager. And especially back then when, again, very little knowledge. I had very messy spaces, so organised piles of shit everywhere in my bedroom. I'm sure most ADHDers will be able to resonate with that. I was often labelled as lazy and inattentive when I felt like I was trying my hardest, which was really heartbreaking. And when you're overexerting yourself and you're masking all the time and you're trying really hard and you can see other people are just kind of flying through, things that feel really basic to them, and it's like for you, you're really trying to keep up. It just feels like people are, I guess neurotypicals are at a walking pace and you're at a running pace just trying to keep up with them. I guess that's the best way I could explain it. Again, my school reports were saying the same thing. Class clown, would be great if she applied herself, which obviously I had a huge struggle applying myself to anything unless I was deeply interested in it and I was hyper-focused. It was a struggle to get me to focus on the shit I didn't want to learn. I can't imagine how different it would have been for me being medicated. And I'll go into it a little bit later, but the grief that you feel when you get your diagnosis for the life that you could have had is something that I feel everybody with ADHD, ADD, probably any neurodivergence, when you get that diagnosis, you just think about how different, this part of your life could have been and how things would have turned out had you had that help and understanding. This doesn't necessarily need to be typical to or exclusive to ADHD, but I would talk back to teachers a lot. Like, I had a lot of lip. Like, I would be very quick-witted. I have a lot to say, and they didn't like that. Some of them appreciated it and found it quite funny. But others, I would talk back to teachers. I don't love authority, and I don't love being micromanaged. And I hated it in school. Like, I absolutely did not thrive in school. I already felt very different. I was already going through a lot of bullying. I already felt quite shit about myself. I had a lot going on at home with my dad's sickness, his illness, and the way that he was becoming in his illness as well, and watching my mum struggle. So pairing the two together, plus the ADHD being completely undiagnosed, it was kind of like I didn't have much of a chance at doing that well at school. However, I did thrive at art and English. Art was and still is something that I've always been really good at. It feels nice to be able to say that out loud, to say there was a point in my life where I felt like I couldn't actually say that I'm really good at something. So even just then, recognizing that I feel comfortable saying I was really good at something, like, that's growth in itself. So I was really good at art and I was great at English. But again, with the, I guess, mild dyslexia symptom from the ADHD, it did cause me some issues. They actually ended up putting me in, I don't know if you guys will remember this or know of it, because it might have been different in different states, different schools, whatever. Anyway, I got put into a program called Reading for Sure. And Reading for Sure was primarily for kids with very obvious disabilities. And if you were put in that class, you would get given a lot of shit for it. Like, I didn't physically show signs of a disability the way that other students that were in that class with me did. And it moved so much slower than what was right for me. But because there was that slight delay in me retaining information or putting it down onto paper, I got thrown into that class. And I was in A grade English, but then they put me in that class because they were concerned about that. And the teacher, when I got put in that class, was like, you don't belong here, and was like trying to talk to the other teachers. Like, I got pulled out of it eventually, but she just was like, this is bizarre. But still, like, going through all of that, the shame of walking into that class, people knowing, getting given a hard time about it, and then also feeling like I didn't belong and didn't gain any form of, like, it didn't help me, basically. It didn't support me in my learning. In fact, it slowed me down completely, and it just made me hate school even more, because then I was being teased for being a Reading for Sure student. And there's no shame in being in that class. It just wasn't right for me. And all I actually needed at the end of the day, which now they supply students, whether you've got autism, ADD, ADHD, they give you a little bit of extra time for tests and stuff, like exams, which, as they fucking should, because that's really all we need, is a little bit of extra time. That would have been really good. Like, being medicated and a bit of extra time would have been fucking amazing. Like, that's actually all I needed. So the school let me down. The GPs, they let me down completely. The teachers let me down completely. Nobody knew what was actually going on. No one picked up on it. So I didn't really stand a chance when it came to school. Sometimes I do wish, in all honesty, I say it to my partner a lot, I do wish that I got medicated and was able to get good grades at school, because I would have actually loved to have been a psychologist or a sexologist. And the older I get, the more I'm like, damn, I would have been pretty good at that. And I think I would have really enjoyed helping people in that way. Obviously, it's not my life path. No, I'm not going to start studying now. I think for me, I just wouldn't want to be studying for another 9 years. And I'm so out of the loop of studying. It's like just not going to happen for me now. When I was a teenager, I was extremely impulsive. Now, I feel like everybody that has ADHD listening to this will completely agree. And I would always act on emotion because I didn't know any better. I would get myself into some interesting situations. I was very high strung emotionally. I was very sensitive. I would feel things really deeply and really intensively. And I just kind of thought that I was a sensitive person. And I think I was seen that way by others. But yeah, acting on impulse gets you into all kinds of shit. And luckily, as a teenager, you don't have as many responsibilities. But I was fairly street smart when I was younger, thank God, because I got myself into a lot of different situations. I wasn't a difficult person to be friends with, but I just felt things so much. And I think that was really hard to navigate at that age. I felt really misunderstood by my teachers. And I think I felt really quite resentful towards them as well because they didn't understand me or give me the time of day. Or I had some teachers that were really good with me, but I had others that just saw me as like a problem and couldn't see beyond face value. They couldn't really see that I was going through shit at home, even though they were probably told about it because the principal ended up being really close to my family. And I don't think that there was just any space for young girls, teenage girls to have ADHD the way that I did. Or, I can't imagine how many even students that I went to school with ended up being undiagnosed. Like we all pretty much got diagnosed in the later years. So that lack of information and knowledge around females having ADHD really fucked our generation up quite a lot, to be honest. Losing my dad at 13 years old, which I've briefly spoken about, and having undiagnosed ADHD was really difficult, as you can imagine. Going through grief at that age with all the hormones, with just the craziness of life at that age, and, watching my dad pass away in front of me, going through the trauma of the years of him sick prior to that moment, and having a brain that felt different to everybody else's was very isolating. The heightened emotional dysregulation at the time was very difficult. I was up and down like a yo-yo. Then you've got your period on top of that, which is a whole nother story. Grief and ADHD are very tough. And as I've gotten older, it's very different. But when you're younger and you don't know that you have got this going on as well, it's rough. When I was going through that with my dad, I often felt suicidal. And the suicidal thoughts came up a lot. And mostly in high school, I think that started for me. I felt like I didn't want to be around anymore from about year 8 onwards, year 8, year 9. And the thing about my diagnosis with ADHD, and the more I learn about it, is because I wasn't able to cope with the really heightened emotions, the dysregulation, the really high highs, the very low lows, it made me feel like I just didn't want to be around anymore. For the fact that I was sick of the voices just ruminating thoughts in my head all the time, I couldn't cope. I felt like I just wanted peace from myself and from the world. And it was very often my baseline reaction when things got too much. And I think a lot of people, maybe a lot of neurodivergents in general, have felt that way. You just are so sick and tired and exhausted of existing and going through life's ups and downs. And without fully knowing yourself or what you're going through on top of the external stuff, you do feel like there's no other options. And it's taken me a really long time to learn about that, especially since getting diagnosed and going to a therapist now as well. And she's brilliant, actually. She's got ADHD herself, and it's just so awesome to see somebody with ADHD doing that line of work too. And it's just so nice speaking to somebody that has it. The grief, loss with ADHD, losing loved ones, you feel it more intensely. And you need to give yourself some grace because it's hard as it is as a neurotypical. It's even harder as a neurodivergent. Yeah, you just feel things a lot more deeply. In my young adult years, I have listed off some symptoms that I was struggling with back then as well. The first one is interrupting others. The reason why I used to do that so much, and the same as many ADHDers, is it's like an impulsive thing. So for me personally, I still have to really stop myself now. I think it will just be a lifetime thing for me. Even though I'm able to manage it better, it is a fear of not remembering what you were going to say. So once the person's done finishing that you're speaking with, you're going to forget what you were going to say unless you get it out at that moment. And that also makes me zone out quite a lot, and it did back then too. So even though I wasn't very aware of it then, so I would just interrupt people, and it was never done to be rude or selfish or anything like that. Like, obviously people can take it that way, but it's something that I really struggled with. When you're in a conversation, you get excited and you're just chatting and stuff, and then you're just blurting out something else over the top of them because you didn't want to forget, and then you're excited with the conversation. It's like, it's all a bit chaotic. And for neurotypicals, it can be considered really annoying or like really rude, even though it's not that at all. Honestly, I would say every ADHD that I've met are just really authentic, transparent, gentle people, and they just care about people so much as well. So it's never done with the intent of being an asshole. Like, it really isn't. It's just that impulsivity and accidentally talking over people because you're excited, or like I said, that fear of forgetting what you're going to say. And this shows up for me heaps in the podcast. When I'm interviewing people, it is so fucking difficult for me not to jump in. And I have really had to train myself when there's guests on here not to do that. The biggest compliment that I have ever had about this podcast was actually a public rating on Apple on the podcast. And it said something along the lines of, really great interviewing style. This is the first influencer podcast where they haven't talked over the guest the entire time. And not to say that, like, no shitting on other influencers with podcasts. It's nothing to do with that made me happy. It was the compliment that I didn't talk over people because I have been so self-conscious of that. And it is, you do get self-conscious of it in, social situations, but let alone this podcast, because fuck, I did actually do a practice run of interviewing someone once for the podcast, and the amount that I spoke over them was so alarming. And I was like, okay, really happy I did a practice run of that, because that was absolutely cooked and I need to make sure I do not do that again. So that is a huge one. Interrupting others is a huge one. Zoning out, struggling to stay in conversation when I'm thinking over and over and over again about what I need to remember to say, and then I will still end up forgetting it. Or zoning out because I'm not focused on the conversation as such, not being rude, but I could be ruminating over other stuff or stressing out over other stuff, and I can't stop thinking about it. So back then, as a young adult, still trying to figure myself out, zoning out was a very frequent thing for me. Struggles with authority, difficulty, like I said before, with micromanagement, rigid rules. This is probably why I'm better off working as a sole trader and not under a boss. I think now as an adult and being medicated, totally different, but being unmedicated, undiagnosed, just a wild young adult, yeah, I didn't deal well with that at all. And it's a big reason why I think I was job hopping so much. And that goes into the impulsivity, where making rash decisions, quitting a job, I'm not interested in this anymore, but not having a plan B. I did that a lot. And then I would find the next thing that I was hyper-focused on, and I would run towards that as a career. And yeah, that was a big part of me as a young adult. I did that so much. And even though I was like figuring myself out and, I'm in my early 20s and I had the freedom to be able to do that, and I did learn so much, it's still quite chaotic. Like, my life felt very chaotic at all times, and I do put it down to the fact that I was undiagnosed. This was over 10 years ago, so I am going to talk about it. It's not on my record anymore, but I did lose my license for Hoon Law when I was 19, and this goes down into being impulsive. I was speeding. I actually took the day off of work because fucking hell. I took the day off work because I just needed basically a me day. And I went shopping. This is when I was working an office job. I was at Joondalup Shops and I came down Shenton. So anybody that knows Perth will know what I'm talking about. Came down one of these main roads and there was a truck in front of me and I was getting really impatient. And back then I was pretty bad with my road rage. Is it much different now? Yes, but I still get really irritated on the road, but I'm not this reckless. When I was stuck behind a truck, I was super impatient about it. It was taking fucking forever. I had one of those big wide load signs on the back and I was just over it. I was driving a manual at the time I put that Holden Cruise into fucking second gear and absolutely floored it around, floored it around this super wide load truck. And there was a female officer standing right behind one of the bushes with a handheld and clocked me going way over the speed limit. And my car was impounded on the spot. I lost my license and I didn't have my car for 2 months. My ex-boyfriend at the time, I had to call him to pick me up and I had to shamefully get all of the shit because I'm a messy ADHDer. At the time, my car was like Macca's cups, shoes, basically had half my wardrobe in there, makeup, all kinds of shit, super disorganized, super messy. And I had to get all of my shit into my ex-boyfriend's van and he had to drop me home with all my shit. And I had my friends that were coming home from work because it was like, people were clocking off at that time, driving past me and tooting their fucking horn because they're like, oh my God, like that's AJ getting her car towed with police around. So that was like total impulsive situation when I was younger. Like that type of shit would happen. When I went to court for it, I also didn't take the advice or help from legal aid. And I stood up in court and I represented myself. And he gave me the full extent of the law for that one. I didn't vibe with the legal aid that I was given, so I just said, I'm going to do it myself. And I literally stood up in court and I said, I got impatient and I was brutally honest about what had happened. I think the judge was actually gobsmacked at the fact that I had stood up and just done that. And he suggested that I go to anger management. So even back then, nobody picked up that I had ADHD. Just an angry young adult that was being impatient on the road. So that is a really good example of me being impulsive and a great reason as to why it's worth getting diagnosed if you're having problems like that in your life, because I have been there. Two other things that I struggled with as a young adult was overcommitting myself, because I had a big lack of boundaries. So when it came to saying no and having healthy boundaries, I struggled with this right up until I was about 29 when I came back here and I started doing that work with my life coach. Yeah, that was a really difficult one for me to learn, and that showed up so much my whole life. I always felt guilty saying no to people. I wouldn't say I was too much of a people pleaser, but I didn't like letting people down and I didn't really know how to choose myself. So that showed up a lot as a young adult for me as well. And neglecting self-care. So not prioritizing my own mental health and constantly feeling like I just need to keep up with everybody else and just be normal. So I really ended up in a lot of burnout emotionally quite often. So now I'm going to list off in this present time what I find the most difficult with my ADHD and how I manage it. Heightened sensitivity is one that's obviously been a common thing throughout my whole life, as you've heard before. I've gotten a lot better at dealing with it now. So emotions like frustration, anger, sadness, just those really big emotions. I feel really dysregulated if I am super overwhelmed and stressed. So if I'm just getting totally overloaded with life and all the different things that are happening, or for whatever reason, I do struggle to manage how to deal with those emotions. I'm not going to say that medication fixes that, because you really have to learn how to regulate your nervous system and bring yourself back down to baseline. I do a lot of breathing exercises. I find exercising, going for a walk, separating myself from situations. So if it's like conflict with anybody, really helps. And I think it's just finding things that help you. You can't have your medication, your ADHD medication, and then it just fixes things like this. For me, ADHD medication is something that helps me focus and stay on track. I took my medication before filming this episode because I just feel, one, I'm not well today, so I just feel even more out of it. But I like to make sure I have my medication before recording, because when I record without it and I'm feeling just all over the place, I guess you could say a bit dysregulated. But when I am feeling like that, the recording goes on for so long. I make multiple mistakes. It takes a lot longer to edit in post-production, which is super annoying as well for everybody. I just tend to go off on tangents. But with the medication, I don't do that as much. So that's where medication comes in for me the most. When it comes to really heightened emotions and things like that, you do deal with it better at the time, but overall, you still need to figure out how to regulate yourself because it's not a magic pill. That's what I'm going to say about that. Rejection sensitivity, I am so much less sensitive than I used to be, especially with things that I've been talking about recently on the podcast. I mean, you just tend to grow a thicker skin when you go through situations. I would say it's overacting to perceived criticism. That's what rejection sensitivity is for me now. I deal with it so much better. People actually don't really see it in me that much. Maybe my partner, like obviously I'm very transparent with him, but I mask it very well now. And masking things like that can be really exhausting, but I don't really put myself in situations where I'm around people that are being mean to me all the time. So it's very different to when I was younger at school and things like that. Mood swings happen for me randomly. I feel like it can happen and I don't actually know the reason why I'm triggered. It almost just feels like it's just come out of nowhere. Half the time it's because I'm burnt out from masking things and I just get a bit exhausted and then I'm feeling really like irritated and stuff. So that comes up for me, I would actually say about 2 times a month. I feel this real dip in my mood and I can feel really irritated or I can just feel really down. Obviously battling depression and anxiety my whole life as well, coexisting with ADHD. I have had that a lot in my life. As an adult now, I practice a lot of things like gratitude, journal. There's a lot of steps that I take that really help not having so many of these moments, which have benefited me massively in my day-to-day life. But I do still get these random moments where I just intensely feel like down or pissed off or irritated. It doesn't matter what it is, but there is like quite an extreme jump in my moods. The other time that I feel a real shift in my emotional state is around my period. When you are on your period and you're dysregulated, all of your emotions get so thrown about, and there's a chemical reason as to why this happens. I personally get so affected by my period a week before my period. So I'm in the luteal phase of my period. So unfortunately with ADHDs in particular, also neurotypical women, this could also go for any neurodivergence. I'm not too sure, but speaking for ADHDers and ADDers, the drop in progesterone before your period in that phase can be so... I just don't feel like the same person. Like it throws me off so much. And I have experienced this ever since having a period and obviously like going undiagnosed and having this, for so long. I just always put it down to really bad PMS. But I do have PMS, but it's exasperated massively with the ADHD. And it feels like I'm almost back to being a teenager again and I struggle to regulate completely and I just feel so out of my body. I don't feel like me at all and I feel really like incapable of managing my symptoms. So I'm going to explain to you exactly what happens with that. If you're not aware of it, this will be really interesting information for you. So to put it simply, progesterone has a calming effect on the brain. When the progesterone drops, the calming effect diminishes, leading to things like heightened anxiety, irritability. ADHD symptoms are basically exasperated. So you just don't have what you would usually have, keeping you a little bit more baseline. The emotional reactivity gets really, really intense. And I almost feel that instantly. Like I do things like tracking my period to see what phase I'm in. And I highly, highly recommend that any of you do that because getting really educated on the phases of your period is so essential for just life in general and well-being. Whether you've got ADHD or not, I highly recommend learning the phases of your period because you'll see strengths and times that you need a little bit more support. It just makes you understand yourself so much more. And those fuckers didn't teach us the stuff like that in school that we really needed. Sex ed would have been nice to be taught that in more depth, right? Anyway, so during the luteal phase, your estrogen also drops. And that also causes some issues, unfortunately. So estrogen's role is to advance the availability of dopamine and serotonin, which are key neurotransmitters for ADHD people. Unfortunately, this drop can impair your focus, your emotional regulation, your motivation. and overall just makes the ADHD symptoms feel so much worse. ADHD brains are already super sensitive to the shift in neurotransmitters, so the hormonal fluctuations during this time can amplify the overall sensitivity, causing a notable increase in symptoms such as lack of focus, irritability, impulsivity. I feel like I can't emotionally regulate at all when I'm going through this phase. Symptoms that I experienced before my period are increased brain fog and forgetfulness, which is a big one. Like I literally forget where my stuff is all the time and my partner has to find it for me, which can be super annoying, but he's like totally used to it now. I lose things all the time, like my phone, my keys. I'm terrible, and that's never really gotten that much better. Emotional dysregulation, obviously, like crying, irritability, frustration, that comes up for me a lot. Struggles with planning and task management is a huge one when I'm coming up to my period. I basically don't even need to use my cycle tracker like I do, and I highly recommend it, but I'm so in tune with my cycle and my body now that I can literally tell when I'm just coming up to my period, because it's such a like day to night change for me. And obviously battling with anxiety and depression for so long, coexisting with the ADHD, that stuff can show up for me as well. Okay, so this is what I do to help myself when I've got my period or I'm coming up to my period. So if you wanted to take any notes, this is a time to do it. So the first thing, as I said before, is track your cycle. Tracking your cycle using any form of like calendar, hormonal apps, these are amazing for getting prepared for what you need to do in order to manage your period symptoms better. It helped me really learn and understand myself, and I'm able to log in my symptoms as well. So whatever day it is of the month, I can log in what's going on for me. And I did that for the first couple of months to really understand like the patterns that I have, which were very prominent. I use natural cycles, which I love. But in true ADHD style, I continually forget to take my temperature in the morning. Natural Cycles is an app that is used as like a natural form of contraceptive. So it's really silly of me not to be measuring my temperature every single morning. That's the best way to be using it. But I just forget to do it because I inherently forget to fucking do it because I've got ADHD, and like staying on track with any sort of thing like that every single day, every single morning is like pretty hard. I'm really big on taking supplementation, and obviously if you go to a GP, it's good to consult with them first before taking a bunch of different supplementations, because you also might not need to supplement with these things. And I'm obviously not a medical professional, as you know. I supplement most days with things like magnesium, zinc, and vitamin B6, or like a B complex, because I'm pretty low in those things anyway. Magnesium, we just don't get enough of that in our food day to day. So I love to supplement with that often, especially around my sleep. So I get really good sleep, which is a huge one. I also highly, highly, highly recommend getting your iron levels checked too. I'm always super low in my iron, and it can really exacerbate the symptoms of ADHD if you are low in iron too. So I take organic beef spleen. They're in capsules by a company called NextGen, NXGEN. It's an Australian company. And I find that my body really absorbs that a lot better than your standard iron. Again, check with your medical professional, but I get mine from the organic store. I go to Precious Organics in Perth. That's where I get mine from specifically. Another thing that I do is incorporating wild yam cream. Wild yam cream has been used for centuries for women with premenopausal, menopausal periods. It just helps regulate your hormones naturally. So that is something that I use coming up to my period. During my period, I just rub that onto my wrists, and the brand that I use for that is called Anna's Wild Yam Cream, and I really, really love that one. Obviously, exercising helps a lot when you're not feeling like you're in too much pain too. Regular walking helps me a lot, helps give me a natural dopamine and serotonin boost, helps to level things out with that and counteract those hormonal dips. And prioritizing sleep, which is a huge one, especially for women. We need more sleep than men. Definitely try and focus on getting good sleep around your period, coming up to your period, or just in general. I supplement with magnesium before bed. I also do it in the morning. And I also have 3 milligrams of melatonin before I go to bed. Time management and organization is a big one for me that I have to master as an adult now. And the medication has helped me so much with this. And I just cannot recommend enough how much getting diagnosed, understanding myself better, and having the help of medication when I need it has completely changed my life. Like, I would not be able to do this podcast without the medication. The deadlines that I have had to face even before coming up to Christmas were wild, and I would not be able to juggle, multitask, stay organised, stay focused under all that stress without the help of the medication for me. It's been a godsend, to be honest. To be transparent, I don't think I would be able to commit to this podcast if I hadn't had the help of medication and had been diagnosed and understood myself better, because I can work with my strengths and weaknesses now, whereas before I was just trying to, at a sprinting pace, keep up with everyone else and then just feel shit about myself for not performing how I want to. I don't take mine every day, but I take it when I've got really intense work to do and I need to focus. Everybody's different. Like, if I was working a 9 to 5 in an office every day, I'd need to be taking that medication every single day. Another thing that I found really difficult before being medicated was navigating what tasks are more important to do first. And that's something that was quite tricky with the launch of the podcast. There was such a big list of things to do, and having to identify what was more important, or, do the things that I wasn't as interested in before the things that I was super interested in was really quite hard. Time blindness is so real for me. I have pissed off my partners so much over the years with how late I am to events. They could be the most important events and I will find a way to turn up late to it, or I'll be way too early. And I think the best way that I've managed to work around that naturally without medication is with my Google Calendar. Google Calendar has completely saved my ass. I time block every night, the evening before, and I completely set out my day. Every single block, even to eating, even to travel with driving. And I have 10-minute reminders before every single event, and it keeps me on track. That is how I ended up getting way more organised in my life, and it's because of that app. And I think having any kind of organisational app like that will totally change things for you. Colour coding it, making it all like cute and, aesthetically fun for me, like little things like that just keep me motivated. And a big thing for me as well is checklists, to-do lists where I can physically tick things off at the end of the day, whether they're small or big tasks, gives me a bit of a dopamine hit and it makes me feel good about myself and I feel like I'm being productive. And you need to remember that it's 1% better every day. If you just work towards that, you'll still be feeling good no matter what. If you're working through a journey of depression right now, and you've got a big to-do list in your hands, write the small things down, tick that off at the end of the day. Even if it means having a shower, self-care, tick that off, and it will make you feel like you're moving forward, because it is about that 1% better every single day, no matter what level you're at, no matter what you're doing, it's going to make you feel better and it will get you in a better mindset. Ruminating thoughts, I still struggle with this massively. I haven't learned how to manage this one very well. Especially conflict with people, I think that shows up the most for me. Any conflict with anyone, it's like instant anxiety. Like even this morning, one of my friends wasn't replying to me for the last 24 hours because she's been busy. She's been busy, AJ. But she's watched some of my stories and I'm messaging her being like, hey, you all good? Is everything okay? Blah, blah, blah. Messaging a couple of times over, the last half a day. Hadn't heard anything. She's going through stuff. She's super stressed. She's moving house, stuff like that. Anyway, I'm immediately ruminating thoughts, catastrophizing, what's happened? She must be pissed off with me. That's the type of thing. I go straight into that mode. I don't know if you guys are the same, but it could go into that rejection sensitivity thing again too. I just have pretty intense ruminating thoughts, failing at things, being a perfectionist, ruminating thoughts about that. I'm not so bad with the perfectionism now. When I first met my partner, he says it's a night and day difference with me now. I used to be so bad. And when things used to go wrong in my life, it would be catastrophic. I just would spend days just being a mess over it, which is nothing to be ashamed of if that is what you're like right now. But I was super dysregulated and just going through a lot. So at the time, I didn't deal with things very well. And now I'm very, very different, but I still have those ruminating thoughts. And you can mask as much as you want, but like my thought process at times with things, feeling like a failure or like not performing or blah, 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 that there's so many reasons for the ruminating thoughts. That is a huge one for me. And I would love to get better at that. So getting diagnosed is a pretty rough experience for everybody. I think you go through a huge grieving process of what your life could have been like if you were diagnosed earlier or maybe had medication earlier. Just being able to be given that chance when you were younger to understand yourself better, it's a hard one to come to terms with because you do just feel so emotional around it. Obviously, me talking about it now, I'm not that emotional about it because I've worked through it. Me a few years ago, yeah, it felt like it was a grieving process of a life that could have been different. And I feel like a lot of people who get diagnosed with any neurodivergence, they feel like this. It's a pretty big slap in the face, again, with the ruminating thoughts. You go over things and how they could have been different and how you could have handled things different or how school would have been different. So if you're looking at getting diagnosed, try and prepare yourself for that. It's a really great thing to understand yourself better. And it's a weight lifted off your shoulders to fully get an answer for stuff. But you do tend to go through that grieving process as well. Like it's a catch-22 with that. At least that's what my experience was of it. My partner also has ADHD and he presents quite differently to myself, but he has gone through the same process as me. We can both relate to each other in that respect. And I personally really like dating somebody that has ADHD because we both understand each other. Yes, there's challenges involved in that, big time, but at least we just have more understanding and hold a lot more space for each other when we are struggling. And I feel like in my previous relationship, I didn't have that understanding at all. Granted, I hadn't been diagnosed at that point, but I don't think it would have been any different if I had. Now, if you're trying to get diagnosed, you'll probably know that there's a huge fucking wait, an absurd amount of time to get diagnosed. So I'm going to tell you how I did, and this could be different in each state. I'm not too sure, but if you're an Australian, you'll understand how long it takes to get diagnosed here. If you're in any other country, you might have it a lot easier than us, but for us, it takes forever. I don't know why, because there's so many people that are struggling with this. When I first went to a GP wanting to get a diagnosis, I actually wasn't interested in getting medication. I was very much against taking the prescription drugs every day. It's not something that I wanted. I just wanted to get a diagnosis so I could fully understand where I'm at and what's going on. Now, obviously, I do take the medication and I'm extremely thankful for that because it really bridges the gap that I needed. But I was worried about taking a pharmaceutical every single day and not knowing the potential side effects of it. When I went to this GP, she immediately said that I had it, which I actually got really upset about because it's super unprofessional for a GP to just turn around and say, oh, you've definitely got ADHD. And she said it in quite a condescending manner. I don't think it was done with empathy at all. Basically, I went in there and I was like, yeah, I think I've got ADHD. I don't want medication for it, I don't think. I just really want to get the diagnosis and see somebody that can, help me. And she turns around and was like, oh, you've definitely got ADHD if you can't remember to take your supplements. Because granted, I do forget to take my supplements. I'm not perfect with them. And I don't think that's exclusive to neurodivergent people or people with ADHD or ADD, right? And I said, look, I don't necessarily know if I want to be on medication. I don't know how it will make me feel. I just don't know. If it's going to be for me, I just want to get a diagnosis. So can you send me to somebody that works predominantly with females? Anyway, she turned around and said to me, well, if you were a diabetic, wouldn't you take your medication every day, your insulin? And I was like, yeah, but it's not life-threatening. So unsure with the comparison on that. Anyway, it was the most awkward encounter, and I actually went in the car afterwards and just bawled my eyes out because I just felt like for somebody to just look at me straight away and go, oh, you've definitely got ADHD. It was like, it wasn't a nice way for somebody to say it. So the GP situation rubbed me up the wrong way, and I paid quite a lot of money to see that GP as well. So I was pretty pissed about that, and it delayed things for me. I was like, fuck, I can't be bothered with this. Like, I'm not dealing with people like this. Anyway, I ended up using that referral to send it to a few places, and I didn't hear back for months and months and months. And then one place told me that they could never fit me in. I was like, okay, great. You just made me wait 6 months for that to tell me that. And then the other two places put me in with whoever that they had available. And I looked at the reviews and they were really shit. Like, people were leaving very shit reviews, because I'm pretty particular about who I see when it comes to medical stuff. Obviously, with the plastic surgery episode, you'll know that I'm traumatized by medical professionals in one way or another. So I'm very funny about who I go to. So anyway, what I ended up doing was going to a psychologist. And look, you have to pay quite a bit of money to get diagnosed this way. Whether you go to a psychologist or psychiatrist, you still pay the same amount of money. So essentially, I ended up paying double. So I ended up paying $1,200 for a psychologist that I didn't need a referral for. And they ended up diagnosing me so I could at least go to a psychiatrist with a full diagnosis. Now, the psychiatrists don't necessarily always go off of the psychologist's diagnosis. They like to do their own testing as well. I did it for my own peace of mind. And then when I had the full diagnosis, I ended up going to a psychiatrist, and that's when I started looking into medication, because the psychologist was like, look, you could really benefit from this even just for working. I don't want you to rule it out completely. So I was like, okay. Now, the psychiatrists were taking ages to get in with. There's a thing called telehealth. Most of you will know what that is. And there's quite a lot of psychiatrists that are working on telehealth. So you don't have to have in-person appointments and you don't have to wait forever. I ended up waiting almost a year, all up with everything that I did, to see a psychiatrist through a doctor referral only. And I ended up finding a psychiatrist that worked for me within 3 weeks on telehealth. So if you are struggling to get a diagnosis, or you're struggling to see a medical professional and you want to be diagnosed and you want to look into medication to help you, then look into psychiatrists that work on telehealth and go that way, because best thing I ever did. Plus, it worked into my schedule way better and I didn't have to drive like 40 minutes away. So that ended up being a way quicker process than what I was doing, the traditional way that everyone else was doing it. Granted, I ended up paying over $1,000 for the psychiatrist as well, but that psychiatrist actually did take on a lot of what the testing was done from the psych. The psychologists like to find alternative routes to medication, which is awesome. And obviously I've been seeing a psychologist as well. So I'm now on Ritalin. That's the medication that I have, the quick release, and that works really well for me. So to finish off this episode, I'm going to tell you some things that really help me manage my ADHD on a day-to-day basis. So obviously my medication when I'm working, like I said before, and the daily strategies I use is time blocking with my Google Calendar, which I wholeheartedly believe that you guys should try if you haven't. Practicing gratitude and mindfulness. So really getting my thoughts out onto pen and paper and practicing gratitude for every single day. I use the 5-minute gratitude journal, and that really helps me just focus on the positives in my life. And when I'm feeling down about myself, that really helps me just stay on track. And practicing mindfulness really helps me to put my thoughts onto paper where I can see kind of how I'm going and check in with myself, and just to see what areas I need to support myself more in. Keeping my space clean is a huge one. A clean space is a clear mind for me. So as messy as I am by default, I am way more organized now. I keep my space clean because I know it ultimately helps my head so much more. And I don't want to live in a mess anymore. So I work really hard to just make sure my space is super, super organized and clean, and it just helps my day to day. If I'm working, or even just in general, I really love to listen to lo-fi study music, which is music without lyrics, and it's just very peaceful and calming. If I listen to music with any form of lyrics when I'm trying to write things, even like with studying a subject or learning things, whatever it is, writing emails, I cannot listen to music with lyrics. And when I figured that out, I think I started doing that before I was even diagnosed, back when I was in America. That completely changed how I worked. So if you haven't tried that, you absolutely should, because that was a game changer for me. And I really noticed myself not get as distracted. Like, I would say it got cut down by like 80%, because my brain would just start singing along with the music, or it would make me think of something. And then I would just be like going off thinking about all kinds of different shit, like different memories, whatever. Music that's chill without lyrics is key. I have so many things I could say about ADHD, so I think I'm definitely going to do some more episodes, but for now, I'm going to leave it at that because I've been recording for ages. But I hope this episode was able to shed some light on some aspects about ADHD for you, and wherever you are at in your journey with ADHD, you're absolutely not alone. It's a big journey from going from the chaos of when you were younger to the clarity as an adult. Getting diagnosed. There's so many layers as to why it is the journey that it is. And I'm so happy there's so many more women speaking out about it now and their experiences with it. I would love, love, love to hear any of you that are going through your journey with ADHD. I really want to talk about this more because obviously it plays such a big role in my life. And I would love to talk about all the other very specific things to me that I deal with in my own symptoms day to day. There's so many different things, like very particular things, even just driving constantly with a GPS on. Even if I've been to that place a million times before, I always put my GPS on. There's a lot of different nuances to it. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember that ADHD is also a superpower. There's so many reasons as to why I do love myself as a person with ADHD. The hyperfocus is like a total superpower when you can tap into it. We're beautifully sensitive people. We're authentic. We overshare a lot because we're just naturally very transparent. There's so many beautiful aspects to people with ADHD. And yeah, if you're feeling any sort of shame about having ADHD, just know that you are so loved as you are, and you absolutely do not need to change who you are. And it's just about managing the symptoms so that you are living a happy, healthy life. And you will find your people. If you don't feel like you're with your people now, you will find your people, and you'll often find that they have ADHD too. But on that note, I'm going to leave it here. I 100% will do another episode on this and go into more detail. But until then, I love you guys, and I will see you in the next episode. Mwah.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a share. You never know who might need a little emotional content in their life. For daily feel-good posts, follow @_emotional content on Instagram and TikTok. And don't forget to hit that follow button so you're notified every time a new episode drops. Your support means the absolute world to me.